Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today. This is Net 7 once again, and I want to appreciate you coming in and tuning into this episode. We're going to be discussing today and essentially debunking the lies of the Iranians, the Qataris on Saudi Arabia's military intervention in Yemen that was done at the request of the Yemeni people. For those of you tuning in for the first time,
Pleasure to be meeting you, sweetheart. Quite a pleasure.
and for those of you returning,
Who wants some quality time with Daddy?
anyway, so let's get ready and let's begin. So, the issues that have been going on in Yemen completely the fault and the responsibility of the Iranian government and also of the of the Houthi terrorists in Yemen. What has happened, unfortunately, is that continually the people of Saudi Arabia, and in particular Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, have been blamed for the violence in Yemen. All the violence, of course, is the responsibility of the Houthi terrorists and of their Iranian puppet masters, the Ayatollahs, and of course of the Qatari government, who sit behind and gleefully watch the Houthis commit terrorist acts across Yemen. There have been a lot of lies and misinformation that have been told about that has been said about this conflict about Saudi Arabia. And this video's purpose, once again, is to debunk that nonsense. Of course, unfortunately, I'm not going to convince everyone because, well, some people just,
Suffering some form of brain damage.
and others, of
It's not
course.
my fault you got a smooth little brain upstairs.
The reality is that some people will not believe the truth no matter what. And this, of course, is the Al Jazeera people who literally prostrate themselves at every anti-American statement out there. Of course, from Qatar, because Qatar is one of the biggest propagandists in the entire Middle East and in the world with a global reaching influence. It's quite shocking that such a small state has been so effective in uh, being able to successfully mass report anti-American, anti-Western, anti-Saudi propaganda, and anti-Israeli propaganda on a pretty much daily basis. But let's get into the content, though, of debunking all the nonsense that has been told about Saudi Arabia in this conflict. So, and I've debated this issue before with other people before, but this video is specifically a part, 4 of my Support the Saudi Intervention in Yemen series, and this the purpose of this part of the series, again, is to debunk the lies told. So one of the things about that has been told about Saudi Arabia is that they're intentionally targeting hospitals, just trying to kill as many innocent people as possible. This is a lie, false. Amnesty International actually reported on this back in 2018 and talked about this situation and what happens. So, title of this one would be Yemen Houthi gunmen raid hospital as Hodada's civilians face imminent onslaught. Houthi gunmen take up positions on Capitol roof, and let's get into the content. Civilians in Yemen's western port of Hodeidah will pay a terrible price amid the battle engulfing their city unless warring parties act immediately to protect them from fighting, Amnesty International warned today. In an extremely worrying development, Houthi fighters arrived at a hospital in Hodeidah and recently took up positions atop a hospital roof, placing numerous civilians inside the building in grave danger. This is a stomach-churning development that could have devastating consequences for the hospital's medical workers and dozens of civilian patients, including many children being treated there, said Sama Hadid, Amnesty International's Middle East Director of Campaigns. The present presence of Houthi fighters in the hospital's roof violates international humanitarian law, but this violation does not make the hospital and the patients and medical staff lawful targets. But the reality is that the author does not realize that if you are fighting on a hospital roof, if you put your fighters there and your soldiers you're getting shot at, you do not know whether that's a hospital or not. You see that as your soldiers are being shot at and killed from. Mm. This is a deliberate militarization of hospital comes in the context of the Saudi Arabia and UAE's coalition relentless and devastating strikes in civilian areas throughout the war. And of course, the reason that these areas are full of civilians is because the Houthis plant themselves directly in civilian areas because their intent is to try to get as many killed as possible. This is the goal, obviously, of terrorists because what terrorists try to do is ingrain themselves into civilian areas. So when the military are forced to respond after their soldiers and civilians are being killed, the terrorists can simply say, oh, it's the government bad, not us, which isn't the case. Local contacts in Hodeidah told Amnesty International that groups of armed Houthi fighters traveling in Toyota pickup trucks arrived at the hospital in the city's 22nd May district on Friday, 2nd November. They commandeered a section of the hospital before placing a team of fighters on the roof. Hospital staff confirmed that armed fighters have been coming and going ever since. The hospital is close to Street 50 in the eastern port of Hodeidah. There has been fierce fighting in the area since the weekend, endangering the hospital and all those inside. So, of course, what the Houthis are doing is they are intentionally trying to put hospital staff and the patients at risk, while also using the hospital as a place to snipe and attack and murder Saudi soldiers and Yemeni soldiers fighting for their country. The laws of war demand that hospitals are not used for military purposes. Placing gunmen on hospital roofs blurs lines which should never be blurred. Hospitals are not a target. The sick and injured have an absolute right to safe medical treatment at all times, and medical workers must be allowed to carry out their life saving work. Of course, though, to a terrorist, it doesn't matter whether it's a hospital or a religious building. All that matters is that they can use it to kill and murder innocent people. And if you're not aware where Hodeidah is, it is in the western part of Yemen, along the coast right here. So, once again, the Houthi rebels are engaging in essentially what is a war crime by militarizing hospitals, and that's not just Amnesty International; it's also the Independent. Yemen war: Houthi rebels militarizing hospital warms Amnesty. Houthi fighters have turned a hospital in Hodeidah into sniper position, putting lives at risk as the fighting threatens to engulf the city's new functioning medical centers. And of course, the suffering, of course, that you see right here is caused by the Houthi terrorists and by the Iranian government, who are intent on destroying every civilian in Yemen if so can beat Saudi Arabia. Houthi rebels have turned a medical center in Yemen's contested city of Hodeidah into a sniper position. Now, of course, this was in 2018, so the situation may have changed, whether it's contested or not. A sign the Iran-backed group is militarizing hospitals and using civilians as human shields, Amnesty International has warned. The report came as more than just a group sounded the alarm about the catastrophic impact of renewed fighting between the rebels and Saudi Arabia-led coalition over the Red Sea city. Just a day before, the United Nations warned that dozens of starving children being treated at Hodeidah's largest hospital, Al-Thawa, were at imminent risk of death because the building was just meters from the front line. Of course, while the Saudis try to save as many people as possible and prevent as many civilian deaths as possible, the Houthis are intent on maximizing as many casualties as possible because that's what terror is. Meanwhile, a Save the Children supported clinic in another part was hit by gunfire on the same day, destroying a pharmacy that held life-saving medicine. Amnesty said Houthi in a pickup truck forced staff a hospital in Hodeida's 22nd May district on Friday and placed a team of snipers on the roof, turning it into a potential target for airstrikes in violation of international law. And after just reading earlier, this is a stomach-churning development that could have devastating consequences for hospitals, medical workers, and dozens of civilian patients, including many being treated there. And of course, it just reiterates the fact that placing gunmen on a hospital roof where people are supposed to be getting medical treatment is a war crime. You are not allowed to use a hospital place of war fighting. It's the same thing in which you use a religious building for fighting. You're not, for example, militarize a church or a mosque or a synagogue because these are places of worship. They're considered out of bounds, the same way in which a hospital is considered a place where people, uh, civilians, are supposed to get medical care and assistance. It's not supposed to touch those. Of course, though, what these do intentionally, they put themselves in place like this. They commit snipers to these roofs to try and kill Yemeni soldiers and Saudi soldiers, and then force a response. So that way they can say, "Look, it's the West. Look, it's Saudi's fault, and look what they're doing," even though they're simply responding to people to kill them. And the actual people who are committing war crimes are trying to say, "Oh no, the response is the bad thing." And of course, people are from Al Jazeera are playing to that. Hodeidah has become the latest and arguably most fierce battleground between the Iran-backed rebels and a Saudi-led coalition who have been fighting the country for 3.5 years. Extended now. As the ruinous war has ripped apart Yemen, which is now on the brink of famine and the grips of its large humanitarian crisis in terms of numbers. Well, it may have changed with the whole Ukraine situation. The UN has people can die from starvation if the fighting continues. Around 23 million rely on outside aid to survive. And of course, this is what the terrorists are responsible for. The Houthi terrorists by Iran and are the ones causing this terrible travesty to occur. And meanwhile, Saudi Arabia and its Gulf allies like the UAE and other coalition are trying to stop these Houthis from taking over the country, committing their gruesome, horrific acts. It just amazes me that what happens in Yemen right now, that people are blaming the military of Saudi Arabia, they're blaming the Saudi government, and they're also indirectly uh, blaming the Yemeni government for what Houthi terrorists, for what the Iran government, and what the Qatari government are doing in the country. The fact of the matter is that this is just absolutely disappointingly sad, in which the people who are trying to stop the terrorists from committing horrific acts in the country are the ones being blamed as the bad guys. This is part of what, I- if you're a Christian, kind of what the Bible talks about in some ways. It says in the end times, who, people will call evil good and they will call good evil. Just like how you have so many people, in America today, clamoring for, abortion, when we know it is evil, but they call it good, as if it's a benefit and a boon for society, as if killing unborn children is good. And there's all sorts of other things going on. For example, calling the intervention in Afghanistan evil when it was good to fight against these Taliban and Al-Qaeda terrorists. And then, of course, they did the same thing with Iraq when they said, fighting against the Ba'athist regime and despotic regime in Iraq is bad, and the terrorists there are good. And how continually, and we see today how even there are people too defending the Kremlin's illegal invasion of Ukraine and saying, "Oh, that's good." It just sickens me. that this is going on. Of course, unfortunately, what happens. We live in an era of fake news in which continually you see people propagating lies and smears to people trying to do the right thing. And just like we've examined right here, how the Houthis are essentially using hospitals as a station to commit war, which is a war crime, and it is illegal what they are doing. And then when the Saudis and the Yemeni government respond to those terrorists on the using hospitals, and how are they supposed to know that it's a hospital or not when your soldiers are being sniped and shot from those buildings? And then when they respond, as you would expect, then the Houthis and then their apologists, like from the Gray Zone news, with those terrorists like those terrorist lovers like Max Blumenthal and Aaron Matt, and the terrorist apologists, from MSNBC, formerly Al Jazeera, like Mehdi Hassan, say that the response is bad, but no, the terrorists are somehow justified. And then they feign that they really want this fighting to stop. Well, if that was true, why aren't they telling the Ayatollahs to stop? But let's move on to the next lie and myth that needs to be debunked. So we've just debunked the idea that the Saudis are and the Yemenis are trying to target people and civilians in hospitals, which we found that's a lie. There's also been a lie propagated that the United States and the Saudi Arabia and the Yemeni government were recruiting Al-Qaeda in. So you've heard this before. It's like, oh, the Saudis are with, Al-Qaeda in Yemen. This is just a bunch of bogus nonsense. For one thing, Al-Qaeda wants to destroy Saudi Arabia. They want to depose the royal family. They want to kill the royal family because to them they are infidels. To Al-Qaeda, the royal family in Saudi Arabia are traitors to their extremist form of religious Wahhabism, and they want to get rid of them. This is why Saudi Arabia has been a critical ally in fighting Al-Qaeda. And this goes all the way back to the first Iraq War, what has been known as the Persian Gulf War, in which Osama bin Laden tried to tell the royal family, like, "Hey, I'll bring all my fighters from Afghanistan. We'll fight for, drive Saddam Hussein out of, Kuwait and away from Saudi Arabia, and then we'll help establish an Islamic style caliphate in Iraq." And the Saudi government said, "No, you're wacko. We're going to go with the Americans because they're not psycho like you." And of course, he never forgave them for that. And so Al Qaeda's policy since then has been to destroy the Saudi royal family. And then, of course, people make up lies, though, to suggest that, well, because to suggest that that the Saudis are recruiting Al Qaeda and that the Americans are doing it by extension and that the Yemeni government is doing it by extension. This is totally false. So we have right here an article from the Washington Times titled "The Pentagon Denies Reports of U.S. Allies Bribing Recruiting Al-Qaeda Fighters in Yemen." Pentagon officials are adamantly denying reports that U.S.-supported allies have bribed and at times recruited members of Al-Qaeda's Yemeni cell to support their ongoing campaign against Iranian-backed Shia paramilitaries in the country. This is false, patently false. Pentagon spokesperson Colonel Rob Manning said regarding the claims, first reported by the Associated Press, that members of the Saudi and Emirati-led Arab coalition battling Houthi rebels in Yemen have co-opted Al-Qaeda members in the fight. "We do not pay Al-Qaeda, we kill Al-Qaeda," he told reporters at the Pentagon this week, declining to comment further. His comments come amid signs the Arab coalition's campaign to retake part city of Hodeidah from Tehran's proxy forces has stalled. Houthi militias have received direct support from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, and Quds Force, the IRGC's directorate responsible for advising Shia paramilitary forces in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and elsewhere across the globe. Well, of course it stalled because the Saudis are trying to save Yemen. They're not trying to destroy it like the Houthi terrorists are. of because states like Saudi Arabia and Yemen and the United States play by real rules of war compared to terrorist groups like the Houthis, which have no rules. It's just about kill as many people as possible and just count the dead later. It is Iran is supporting the Houthis, launching extended range missiles against major population centers in Saudi Arabia, and who are blocking the proper distribution of humanitarian aid and critical medicines to address one of the largest outbreaks of cholera on record in the world. By reinforcing the Houthi blockade on humanitarian aid through the Hodeidah port, U.S. Central Command Chief General Joseph Votel told reporters last week. So again, this goes back to an earlier point I have made in a previous that I've made, is that it's the Houthis who are causing this crisis. They decide who gets the aid and who doesn't. And they, of course, sell aid on the black market to fund their commanders. And they, of course, what they do is they essentially try to essentially commit, like to say, well, hey, if you don't support us, then we're going to deny you food. Now, the Trump. This has happened. This was article came out during the Trump administration, and the White House vowed to step up pressure on the Iranian regime and its proxy forces, like the Quds and the IRGC. And the fact of the matter is that the United States, under the Trump administration, it was at least helping our Saudi allies in Yemen and our Yemeni allies in Yemen fight the good fight against these Houthi terrorists who are trying to destroy the country. Of course, no one wants to give the prior administration credit for doing something that was right, because at the end of the day, there's just so much anti-Saudi, anti-American bias. The reality is, though, is that the Saudis are fighting a fight against not just the Houthi terrorists, they're also fighting Al-Qaeda in their borders and outside their borders in Yemen, because the goal of Al-Qaeda is to destroy Saudi Arabia and replace it with an Islamic caliphate. And so these people who don't know what they're talking about try to suggest that, they just throw out a claim with no evidence or proof whatsoever. Oh, the Saudis are supporting Al Qaeda. And just because it's an anti Saudi claim, even though there's no facts around it, people just buy it hook, line, and sinker because there is such an anti Saudi bias. That is the ridiculousness of what we see today, that people don't care whether it's true or not. But just because it sounds it's a way to beat up on America and beat up on the West, they will buy it and they will eat it up hook, line, and sinker, because we have a bunch of, stupid people like, Kremlin Kyle out there.
Guess what? Everybody pisses, everybody shits. Get over it.
Yeah, these are the kind of idiots that we have to deal with. These nonsensical talking heads who are essentially fifth columns in our midst, aiding and abetting the enemy, while getting cash, covertly stuffed in their pockets by these hostile enemy regimes through places like Patreon and such. So when we talk about Al Qaeda in Yemen, the fact of the matter is that the reason that there is Al Qaeda in Yemen is because of what the Houthis have done. The civil war instigated by the Houthis and pushed by the Iranians caused this. So let's take a look at this right here. So arguably ACAP, that's Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen, has benefited from a combination of Houthi military expansion and growing sectarianism, as these have opened new opportunities for forging local alliances. So as you can see right there, the reality is that These Houthis helped grow Al Qaeda actually within Yemen. They created the opportunity for not just Al Qaeda, but also ISIS to recruit and establish more durable footholds in local communities in Yemen. Houthis and their opponents share responsibility for the growth in sectarian sentiment. The Houthis conflate, different groups with southern separatists and other groups because there's a lot of different players in the civil war in Yemen. There's southern separatists who want to actually secede from Yemen. There is ACAP, Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. There is ISIS, ISIL, or Daesh, however you want to call it. But again, Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula existed, but it did not have the same power that it had before the civil war. And ISIS didn't even exist in the country until the Houthis came in. However, at the time, IS did not exist in Aden. That's the biggest city in the south of Yemen. That's pretty much where the southern separatists are headed out of. It was the war triggered by the Houthis' capture of Sana'a, that's the capital of Yemen, and subsequent chaos that gave rise to the group. In other governments, the Houthis' military progress had similar catalyzing effect on sectarianism. So as you can see right there, it was the Houthis that created the chaos in which allowed the terrorists, the Houthis, which allowed other terrorists to spring out from. So you had not just Houthi terrorists, then you had Al Qaeda, who was able to take advantage of the chaos and grow themselves and actually become a big player for a time, although they no longer are, um, thanks to the Saudi government and thanks to the Yemeni government. Saudi Arabia, Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula has been, largely defeated, thanks also to the Trump administration. No thanks to Biden, and of course, uh, ISIL didn't even exist in the country until the civil war that the Houthis started, taking advantage of the chaos to infiltrate themselves into the south of Yemen. And so when people blame Saudi Arabia and say, "Oh, with lies and propaganda that the Saudis are supporting Al Qaeda," one, they're not they're complete competitors. They hate each other. Al Qaeda hates the Saudi royal family. The Saudi royal family hates them, and for good reason. And not only that, Saudis have been fighting Al Qaeda in Yemen to the point where now the group doesn't really have any territory. It's now nothing more than just sporadic insurgency with very little effect. And remember, at one point, Al Qaeda actually had a significant chunk of the northeastern part of the country during the Civil War. It no longer does. But the reality is that the Houthis caused Al Qaeda to come about and to get stronger, and they caused ISIL to pop up out of nowhere. And so, to address the point being made that people make suggesting that Saudi Arabia is using Al Qaeda to fight the Houthis and to stabilize Yemen is bogus. We've just proven that. I don't think I need to reiterate, but I suppose I will. One, the Saudis and the Houthis are totally opposed. The Saudis and Al Qaeda are totally opposed to each other, and this has been this has been going on, the fight between Al Qaeda and the Saudi government since the early '90s. In which, remember, Osama bin Laden tried to get the royal family to let him bring his jihadists into the country to fight Saddam Hussein and establish an Islamic caliphate in Iraq and in Kuwait and in Saudi Arabia. And they said, no, you're nuts, you're wacko. We don't want an Islamic caliphate. And we're going to go with the Americans because they're reasonable and sensible. And since then, there has been a fight between the two. And Saudi Arabia has been instrumental in fighting Al Qaeda in Yemen. If it was not for Saudi Arabia fighting Al Qaeda in Yemen, the Al Qaeda would still have a huge chunk of the country. Remember, at one point in time, Al Qaeda controlled ACAP, that's Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, controlled a significant part of the northeastern part of Yemen and even some eastern ports. That no longer exists today because of what Saudi Arabia has done in fighting Al Qaeda, but what the United States under the Trump administration did fighting Al Qaeda, and what the Yemeni government did in fighting Al Qaeda. Now, going on, there are other things that need to go on. So when we talk about, allegations too, we've already refuted the allegation that that Saudi Arabia intentionally targets civilian um, buildings like hospitals. We've already disproven that lie because the Houthis, as we've shown, militarize those hospitals. They put snipers on that roof, and so the Saudis are simply responding to people shooting and killing their soldiers from those roofs. And it's the Houthis that are responsible for that because it is illegal to militarize a hospital, just like it's illegal to militarize a mosque or a synagogue or a church or a temple. And we've disproven the lie that the that Saudi Arabia is giving arms or support to Al Qaeda to fight the Houthis. We've disproven that. And again, of course, people are going to continue to say, oh, Saudi Arabia and Israel and blah, blah, this. It's so conspiratorial and it's nonsensical, but people buy it just because no matter how little, no matter no matter that these claims are just so stupid on their own with literally nothing to back them up except conspiracy. The reality is, and sadly, people just buy it because, well, they just choose to because they're ignorant and stupid. People from the gray zone news and Al Jazeera spew all sorts of nonsense, just because they can, and it's pathetic. But going on to our next point, finally, in this video, which is, um, the claim still is made constantly that the Saudis are engaging in a terrible air campaign in Yemen. And of course, this is a lie too. Bombing terrorists who are trying to destroy Yemen is not is n- is the best credible evidence these people have, and shows once again they have nothing. Let's examine the allegations that are made about Saudi Arabia, because the reality is that a lot of these claims are just flat out lies. In fact, in 2016, with the JIAT, they freaking found out that of many of the claims that were leveled against the Saudi Air Force and against the Saudi military, many of these claims were completely bogus, that they had no support behind them. And people are going to argue, oh no, the JIAT is not independent or whatever. No. The JIAT has already affirmed its neutrality in dealing with Yemeni warring parties, okay? And that's the Joint Incident Assessment Team, all right? The Joint Assessment Team, JIAT, in Yemen confirmed on Tuesday that its reports are prepared according to conventional international humanitarian standards and with no political bias. Responding positively to international reports, JIT spokesman Mansour al-Mansour said the panel welcomed reports and discussions put forth by all international organizations. In a conference held in Riyadh, that's the capital of Saudi Arabia, Mansour reviewed credibility ensuring procedures followed by the assessment team for conducting reports and gathering evidence. He also stressed that the JIAT is independent and impartial and stands at the same distance from all parties in the Yemeni conflict, the Saudi press agency reported. Mansour presented videos dated back to the moment Al Dalid Bridge, which links IB government to Houthi held Sana'a, was targeted. Footage showed the absence of civilians during the attack, debunking reports claiming of victims being killed or injured by Arab coalition partners. And of course, this is why the JIAT dismisses so many of these complaints because they've been found to be bogus. That they've found to be nothing more than Houthi lies, trying to essentially garner false sympathy for them and attempt to try to discredit the intervention. Being used by coup militias for logistics purposes and a supply room for armed factions in Sana'a, the bridge made a valid military target. Yes, so when you are using a bridge, okay, or for logistics to supply your people with guns and ammo and bombs to kill and murder and maim innocent Yemeni people and innocent Saudis trying to stop the killing, yeah, it's a military target. JIAT reviewed a list of cases, some of which date back to 2015. In the case of 86, the United Nations High Commissioner for High Reports alleged an Arabian coalition plane dropped a bomb on Wal Ibmat Mosque in Laj government, which killed 10 people and wounded 15 others. He pointed out that the evidence by JIAT shows that coalition forces carried out an air mission on a militant target located some 300 meters away from the mosque. After reviewing satellite imaging, Mansour said that the investigating team also found that the building was destroyed 2 months before the date allegations presumed. So, of course, this is what we constantly see from propagandists at Al Jazeera in Qatar and propagandists from the Gray Zone News and from other outlets like RT News, which is Kremlin media. Of course, Gray Zone is probably a mixture of Kremlin media, CCP, Chinese Communist Party media, Qatari media, all in one, and Maduro media so of course it's the worst of all of them. As for case 87, Mansour addressed the human rights report issued on uh, on November 15th, on alleging that on May 12, 2015, a plane dropped 5 bombs on Shaza Market in the village of Zabib, Al Hodadaya government, which led to the death of 60 civilians and injured at least 150 others. According to the group's report, a delegated team inspected the site on July 26, 2015, and reported on 3 bombs hitting a 3-story building in a commercial area. It added that the explosions also destroyed 2 other buildings with another restaurant and 4 grocery stores. Mansour said that the JIAT found that there were no air missions throughout Hodeidah province at this time. In light of this, JIAT concluded that coalition air forces had not bombed Shaza Market in the village of Zabid. And so, of course, once again, these claims have been found to have been nothing more than lies propagated by the Houthis and by their talking heads in Doha and in the Kremlin and in Beijing, and of course their useful idiots like Max Blumenthal, Aaron Matt, and others, from the Gray Zone. Addressing other claims on Arab coalition planes dropping 3 bombs on the cultural center in Sada and a nearby house, which led to the death of 28 people and injured 3 others, Mansour said that the center was being employed by Houthi militants for communication and expanding military propaganda. All right, and when you use a building like this for to, to expand your power base, it becomes a military target. And of course, the people who die in that building are the Houthis' responsibility, not the Saudis. JIAT's report verified that coalition forces adhere to rules of engagement and that the air mission inventory, the post mission report, video recordings, satellite imagery, and evidence assessment show that on May 5th, 2015, Coalition forces carried out an air mission against the cultural center in Sada City after it fulfilled criteria, making it valid for military targeting. So as you can see right there, the Saudis actually follow the basic rules and the idea that is it a target? Is it worthwhile? Is it legitimate? And what are the costs? Compared to the Houthis, which just plant roadside bombs everywhere and just hope to kill as many people as possible and cause the death and maim as many children as possible. And of course, how they starve their own people and starve their own communities and don't care about the humanitarian crisis that results from it. In light of this, JIT concluded that the targeting of the military center was consistent with international humanitarian law and its customary rule. And of course, this is of course the fact of the matter is that once again it has been proven that the majority of these claims made by talking heads, uh, uh, you know, who are essentially paid by either A, the Kremlin, or B, the Ayatollahs, or C, the CCP, or even the Ba'athis, just like um, that 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 one guy who used to work at the Young Turks, who essentially was found to have been taking money from pro-Assad groups. I forget his name at the moment, but you get my point. Is that these people are constantly making up lies, and the JIAT is finding out that the vast majority of these complaints are false, and that the vast majority of them are not true. And but of course, people don't care. But we are where we are. And what do I think about isolationists with Saudi Arabia and Iran trying to suggest that it's none of America's business? Terrorism is America's business. Fighting terrorism is America's business. Terrorism is everyone's business. Fighting terrorism is everyone's business. So when anyone says that it's none of our business, isolationists as per usual, I remember the same argument, made a long while back, in the 30s, where the neo samurai Japanese empire said, you know, stay out of our business. What we're doing in China, what we're doing in Manchuria, what we're doing in Southeast Asia, not your business. I remember what the Nazi Germany did in the late 30s when they said to America, "Stay out of your business. This is an internal German matter. What we're doing with the Jews." And of course, what Saddam Hussein was doing, committing genocide against the Kurds, persecuting the Assyrian Christian minority, and treating people, murdering people left and right who opposed him. It's not your business. This is the talking point of every single dictatorial and despotic regime and every terrorist group to try to cut people who are trying to do the right thing at the knees. Well, you know what? I don't buy this crap nonsense. Okay, if your neighbor, if down the street from you, your house, your you have a neighbor or a relative or someone that you don't even know who's being beaten by their husband, do you just say, "Well, that's down the street from me. It's none of my business"? No. You call the police. You get them to stop that, and you get them to arrest that person and charge that person and send that person to prison. Or you go over there and you stop it yourself, and then you call an ambulance for the woman to help them out and call the police to arrest that person. You don't just say, "None of my business." It just angers me when I hear that. Continuing on to address more of the propaganda and lies that have been told about Saudi Arabia by the Qataris and the Ayatollahs and to debunk them. We have another article here. The JIT in Yemen denies international organizations' allegations on targeting civilians. The Joint Incident Assessment Team, JIAT in Yemen, refuted 9 allegations that the group had received from international organizations claiming coalition forces bombed buildings, schools, and civilian sites, stating that these allegations were absolutely untrue. The JIAT spokesman, Mansour al-Masur, said that the team received 9 cases with 2 allegations from Human Rights Watch, HRW, and 7 from the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and that the evidence proved that these allegations were untrue. The first case was based on a report issued by HRW in April 2015, claiming that a coalition aircraft dropped 2 bombs on the Ministry of Education in Amman. The first bomb hit a 3-family building, and the second damaged part of the building. After evaluating all evidence on Saturday, April 11th, coalition forces carried out an air mission on the city and Amran Camp 310. Oh shoot, yeah, 310. Monsieur pointed out that the ministry compound was not damaged, and the team found that there were no traces of aerial bombardment on this house. The team validated that the coalition did not target the house, and all measures were taken compatible with international humanitarian law. In the second case reported by HRW, according to Mansour, the team was told the coalition forces had bombed the biopharm factories on January 16, 2016. The spokesperson noted the third case report in the annual report of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights indicated that coalition forces carried out an airstrike on a civilian vehicle in Taiz on May 17th, killing 16 civilians, including 2 women and children. Well, guess what? After investigating the incident, the Yemeni national and the resistance were asked to provide an air support to target a Houthi truck carrying weapons and ammunition in the Al-Wazi in an isolated area, explained. So of course, that you see right here that they claim, oh, that they killed civilians, women and children, and then you find out when you investigate that it wasn't that. These were actually Houthi terrorists who were driving a truck of weapons and ammunition to go kill people. And so, and also earlier too, you say that, oh, they bombed this building, and then you find out, wait a minute, that that didn't even happen. What are you talking about? And then the fourth case was also reported by UN High Commissioner, claiming that the coalition forces conducted airstrikes on Al-Khamis area in Arab Sanaa, killing 5 civilians. According to the allegation, the first airstrike hit the school and the second hit a mosque 50 meters from the school, and an hour later, a third strike targeted a civilian vehicle. Well, guess what? Investigations confirmed that coalition forces did not carry out any missions in the area in Arab. Once in his report, the High Commissioner also indicated that coalition forces bombed Musa bin Omar's school in Lodge, killing 10 civilians, including 3 women and 2 children. The joint team found that the coalition forces carried an aerial mission against 2 targets in Lodge where Houthis are located. The team reviewed video recordings and proved that there were no damage to the school and the target was military. So once again, another lie just thrown out there. And it's sad to see that individuals from such huge organizations, from the UN itself, the UN High Commissioner, are buying these lies, not investigating them, and just putting them out. And then when they're investigated, they're found that, you know what, the allegations just have no truth to them. The spokesman also explained that the annual report of the High Commissioner discussed the bombardment of Baraskash archaeological site in Sana'a, indicating that after verification, the coalition had carried out an aerial mission on a Houthi militia building 66 kilometers from the archaeological site. And once again, more lies being promoted by the Qataris and the Ayatollahs. And when the truth comes out, of course, it's not reported. 7 cases also mentioned by the UN Commissioner for Human Rights reported that 6 civilians, including 3 children and 3 women, were killed, 13 others injured, and 96 houses were damaged as a result of airstrikes in Al-Misat neighborhood in Hodeidah. The joint team discredited this allegation, saying that the coalition forces targeted important leaders of the Republican Guard loyal to the late President Ali Abdullah Saleh inside a building about 1,000 meters from the Emisa neighborhood. So not only did they not target these people at like women and children as the was claimed, they actually targeted a Republican members of the Republican Guard, and this was 1,000 meters away from that Eve neighborhood that it claimed it happened in. Ansar said that the High Commissioner also reported 4 coalition air raids on Al Wazir schools in Bani Hashim Sana, killing 3 children. After investigated, it proved that the coalition carried out an air mission on a building about 1 kilometer away from the school. In addition, satellite imaging taken 4 months after the incident showed there were no traces of destruction or damage to the site. And so, once again, no traces, no evidence, nothing. Of course, this will not stop these people from making up lies, which is absolutely ridiculous. And guess what? Monster concluded that after the investigation, the coalition forces carried out on the same day an air mission on a warehouse and weapons 4 kilometers from Al Fulehi and found no damage to the neighborhood. This is again an allegation that they attacked another archaeological site. So once again, continually, we are seeing that the allegations made by these people and by these groups, uh, by people like the Gray Zone and by people like like in RT News, and by people Al Jazeera, and and all these people like Mehdi Hassan, that they are lying, that they have no evidence, but they have no problem lying through their teeth because there is a political goal in mind. The goal is essentially to discredit the intervention, to help support the terrorism that the Iranians and the Houthis are committing in the country. And it's just downright ridiculous that we're buying it. Because what we have is that, people say, oh, well, what about things in the past that are alleged to happen? The idea, for example, like saying, oh, well, because of one allegation of what the US may have done in the past means that, oh, well, we can't ever trust the US. Well, as you're seeing right there have been a lot of allegations made against Saudi Arabia, and the JIAT has found that these claims, the vast majority of them, are bogus. I would like to remind the viewers that in 2016, the JIAT found that from the start of the Saudi intervention to August 2016, that 75 of the claims that had been made against the Saudi military, only 2 were found to be verifiable and where actual negligence occurred. Only 2 out of 75. You know what that is? That's 0.03. 0.03. It's just absolutely ridiculous that they continually Saudi Arabia has to deal with this anti-Saudi propaganda on a daily basis when they're trying to fight terrorism in the country. And we're gonna review a couple more articles and so we can understand what's going on. To see, because again, it's not just that it's this we as the JIAT continues to investigate these claims that are made, they continually find that they're based off of nonsense, or they're bogus, or they're just completely false. The JIAT refutes 5 recent allegations against Arab coalition in Yemen. The Joint Incidents Assessment Team, JIT, in Yemen announced on Wednesday the results of investigations into allegations against some military operations conducted by the Saudi led Arab coalition. In a press conference, JIT spokesman Mansour al Mansour refuted several claims raised by global bodies and international organizations allegedly committed by coalition forces, the Saudi press agency reported. He confirmed that the investigations and collection of evidence have proven that the coalition has nothing to do with the attack that targeted a hospital in Sada and another one in the Laj governorate. Team confirmed that the coalition attacked a health center in Sana'a government in 2015 when the building was under construction and used by Houthis to store weapons and ammunition. And of course, this is the same tactic that the Hamas group in do in the West Bank and in Gaza. They intentionally will put weapons and ammunition in hospitals because if the Israelis don't attack it, then they have a safe place to which, to store their weapons and their guns to kill Israeli civilians, Israeli police, Israeli military, and anyone in the West Bank and Gaza who questions their authority. But if the Israelis respond, then they could say, they targeted a hospital, they killed people, they're the ones at fault. Death, all their disgusting anti-Semitic death to Israel crap. And of course, the Houthis took note of that, and that's what they're trying to do essentially to Saudi Arabia and indirectly to America and to indirectly to the legitimate Yemeni government. The spokesperson said the targeting center was eligible for being a military target. Yes, you put weapons and ammunition in that building, okay, which are used to kill people. It becomes a military target. The team also refuted claims that missiles hit two buildings at Al Tharwa General Hospital, which serve hundreds of thousands of Yemenis in Taiz city. According to the spokesman, the probe confirmed that no military operations were conducted by the coalition near the hospital during the mentioned date. Al-Mazar reviewed the results of assessing 5 incidents, including those which follows. And of course, the fact of the matter is that there are so many incidents that are coming up, and the Saudis uh, and are being found to actually have been in the right, or that the claims against the Saudis are just lies. Because continually, the reality is that on a daily basis, we are seeing essentially that the Houthis, through their propagandists in Qatar, in Doha, through Al Jazeera, through the Ayatollahs with their allies in the Kremlin, with RT News, and of course their allies in Beijing with the CCP, Chinese Communist Party, and of course, they're useful idiots here in America and in the West, from the secular report from Kremlin Kyle. And there's nothing secular about Kyle Kalinske. He literally shills on a daily basis for the Iranian government. Because of course he loves these people. He loves these terrorists because of course because they essentially, the Kremlin, the CCP, and the Ayatollahs essentially fund his work through Patreon. Of course, Gray Zone News. They are just they're the same thing, explicitly anti-American, explicitly anti-Saudi, explicitly anti-West, and pro-Kremlin, pro-CCP, pro-Ayatollah. They're these traitors like Max Blumenthal, Aaron Matt, and Ben Norton. And I'll also add Kyle Kalinske to that list of traitors as well. But it's constantly, their lies are being disproven, and yet they're still being told. And it's just sad that that people are just buying it because they want to. It's not that it's true; they just want to believe it. You believe in something because they just want to continue. They're spreading their lies to destroy America, to destroy the West, to destroy Saudi Arabia, and to destroy, and to allow the enemies of freedom to succeed. We have these disgusting, traitors in our midst, but they're not going to succeed. We're not going to allow them. We're going to continue to support our ally, Saudi Arabia, and I will hope that Saudi Arabia considers NATO membership, because the reality is that Saudi Arabia needs to understand that by joining NATO, the fight against the Houthis will then become uh, more serious, in that the European nations and the West and America will finally understand a bit more that the terrorism of the Houthis who are a proxy of the Iranian government, is a regional problem, and it is also a international problem because of the crisis that the Houthis are causing, but also because of what the Houthis represent. They are a proxy of the Iranian government, the Ayatollahs in occupied Persia, just like other groups are, just like the Muslim Brotherhood are. And the Muslim Brotherhood have their claws throughout Western countries, like in Canada. And and just like how Turkey, being a member of NATO, has been able to get European nations that are now joining NATO, like Finland and Sweden, to realize that the PKK, Kurdish, communist separatists in the southeast of its country, that these people are a threat to peace and security for all NATO members. In the same way, the same will happen if Saudi Arabia joins NATO, because then all NATO members will be invested in this fight against these terrorists that are funded, supported, and aided and abetted by the Ayatollahs. And I just want to continue to highlight the fact that continually and continually the coalition is constantly lied about, has and continually disproves the nonsense that is told about them when they're fighting the good fight. Um, Coalition not responsible for alleged Yemen airstrike violations, the JIAT. Uh, and for the gentleman this is Mansour al-Mansour. Riyadh. The Joint Incident Assessment Team, JIAT, in Yemen found that the Arab military coalition was not responsible for alleged human rights violation in several airstrikes that conducted in several recent years. It responded on Wednesday to 4 claims that were reported by media and rights groups surrounding the coalition's alleged operational misconduct in the conflict. And I just would like to add that these media and human rights and so-called human rights groups that are making these allegations, is there any effort on these groups to verify or investigate these actual claims and not just simply report them, just for the sake of making news, helping Houthi terrorists, helping the Ayatollahs, helping the Kremlin, helping the CCP? Of course, though, I guess asking, many members of the media and these so-called human rights groups to actually do the right thing is too much, I suppose. The JIAT spokesman Mansour al-Mansour said that an investigation concluded that the procedures followed by the coalition were proper and safe and took into consideration the rules of engagement and international humanitarian law. First claims surrounded an alleged attack on a sanitation facility in Zabid district that occurred between July 26 to 28, 2018. On July 26 of that year, coalition forces did not carry out any air missions in the Zabid district in Al-Hudaydah province, al-Mansour said, adding that the closest air mission to the location of the attack on that day was a military target in the Bajil district, 88 kilometers from Zabid. So once again, they say, "Oh, you struck here," and then it's found, wait, we weren't even in that area. The JIAT spokesman said that a day later, on July 27th, coalition forces also did not carry out any air missions in Sabid. The closest air mission to the location of the attack on that day was a military target in Al-Tuhaita District 15 kilometers from Zabid. The JIAT specialist found that the airstrikes conducted over those 3 days, all outside Zabid, had hit their intended targets. As a result, the JIAT concluded that coalition forces did not target the sanitation facility on Zabid on those days. And of course, this is actually an issue that I debated once with the person who made this claim. And of course, once again, when you investigate those claims, they're found to be false, but people will still regurgitate them no matter what, because of course they just have an anti-Saudi, anti-West, anti-American, anti-NATO bias and are just pro-Kremlin, pro-CCP, pro-Ayatollah, etc. The coalition was also accused of targeting a navigation tower at Sana Airport on November 14, 2017. The JIAT examined the incident and reviewed all relevant documents, including procedures and rules of engagement, daily mission schedules, after mission reports, mission video recordings, satellite images, and provisions and principles of international humanitarian law. So once again, the extent to which the Saudis go to try and prevent other parties from getting killed is incredible. The extent to which they go to is incredible, because they are genuinely concerned about the potential for people who are not actual targets being killed. That is completely different from what the Kremlin is doing in the Ukraine, where the Kremlin is just intent on, doesn't care what it hits, as long as it hits something, even if it's not really a military target, compared to what the Taliban did in Afghanistan and what they're still doing there in Afghanistan, in which they don't care who dies so long as someone dies. And also the same thing in which, you know, other terrorist groups act. Saudi Arabia is holding itself to the highest standards and doing its best to fight actual terrorists. Compared to the enemies who just don't care. The fact of the matter is that the Saudis are fighting the good fight, and we need to back them. I mean, again, they make it clear that they are trying to stop the Houthi terrorists for the people of Yemen. Spokesperson, so Colonel Turki al-Maliki, the spokesman for the coalition forces for the support of legitimacy in Yemen, affirmed that the force's commitment to the provisions of the rules of engagement, humanitarian law, and accountability of violators of the rules of engagement and violators of international humanitarian law. Al-Maliki said during a joint press session with Saudi ambassador to Yemen and general supervisor of the Saudi program for the development of reconstruction of Yemen, Mohammed bin Sayed al-Jaber, here today, that the joint command of the coalition referred files to the results of investigators of incidents of presence of a mistake and violation of rules of engagement to the concerned countries, indicating the file documents and evidence to complete the formalities of accountability. So as you can see right there, the Saudis are invested in saving Yemen. They're invested in trying to hold themselves to the highest standards, while the Houthis are just interested in killing as many people as possible. Saudis are our friends and our allies in this fight against international terrorism. And we should be backing them and supporting them, not demonizing them as is going on in the West. This needs to stop. I'll stop the video here, but I would advise the viewers to please continue to investigate the truth yourself, and you will see that when you look at the facts, that these claims that are made by these groups that are lies, as the JIAT continues to prove. It's time to stand up for the truth. Time to show that we need to back Saudi Arabia in its fight against the Houthi terrorists and against Al-Qaeda and against the Ayatollahs. Thank you so much for coming in and attending. And I do appreciate you coming in. And it's time to start speaking the truth, because you know what? All I do is just say the truth.
Is that enough facts for you?
And you know what? The more the truth comes out against the fifth columns, the isolationists, the appeasers, and the talking heads for the Houthis and for their Ayatollah and Qatari puppet masters, people are gonna start realizing the truth. And you know what?
You see, sweetheart, no one's buying what you're selling anymore.
Anyway, thank you so much for attending. for listening in. You have a great day. Neocon action and V for victory.